In Robert Redford's movie, The River Runs Through It, there are two brothers. Sorry, this text comes close to home. Paul and Norman, they couldn't be more different. They're sons of a Presbyterian minister. And Norman is ambitious and gifted. He is educated and wants to go off to the big city, to Chicago, and to become a journalist, to pursue his dreams. And Paul is an outdoorsman. He likes to fish, so does his brother, but he likes being around home. He ends up getting involved with a Native American woman, and the people of his small town around Missoula judge him for it. He tends to gamble and drink. He's got some rough edges, and his brother and father struggle to understand him at times, wrestle with his choices. It's sometimes most difficult to love those you're closest to. And so there's some estrangement, some pain as they try to work through their differences, these brothers. In this story that we get from Jacob and Esau, we're told that Rebekah finds she's pregnant. After 20 years, there's another a layer of pain. For any of you who have struggled to have children or had to rethink what family might look like for you, 20 years, she realizes she's pregnant, but something doesn't feel right. For anyone who's carried a child, or twins for that matter, or more, there's a lot of commotion going on in the womb. And she asks, whether it's Isaac or her maidservants, is this normal? What's going on here? I feel like I'm about to die here. Something's wrong. So she prays to God, and God says, very much like Mary gets that troubling news, I know I haven't been with any man. How is it I'm going to be pregnant? God tells her, in your womb are two nations, two peoples. They'll be divided in their lives together. Their history will be divided. They're not going to always get along. The older will serve the younger, which I imagine makes her not comforted, but all the more a struggle. The kids are born, and any of you who've had a child, well-wishers come by to see the baby, to bring gifts, and inevitably somebody says, oh, she's got your eyes, or he's got your nose, and inevitably the spouse who is not being compared to the child is standing right there, and somebody's always offended. What do you mean he looks complete? There's two of us that helped make this child, and so somebody is always a little slighted, but then you hope, at least in this story, that it says very descriptively that Esau comes out kind of rough and hairy. You hope in that situation they didn't compare Esau to Rebekah. But anyway, as they're going through the story, it says Jacob's coming out, grabbing his brother's heel, tenaciously clinging to him, the supplanter. That's what they name each of the boys based on that birth narrative. And they start to grow up. And it describes them as, though they're twins, they might have had, growing up, one wonders what their relationship was like. Did they have this twin talk? Did they have this kind of devious understanding that they work together against their parents, as some twins do? Not by any experience. I have no idea. But anyway, it says that Esau was an outdoors, rugged, he liked to hunt, and Isaac loves him. All the things that he sees in his son. But then it says that Rebekah likes Jacob, who likes to hang around the tent, likes to cook. Maybe he doesn't fit the cultural mores of what a man should be at this time, or he's not as rugged as his brother, he's not as manly, whatever it may be. But we see this kind of favoritism and division playing out. Foreshadowing then what happens, as Sarah so beautifully read, he comes home, Esau, after hunting. And he says, and this is where one of those instances where a line of scripture, it would have been so awesome to have been there, to hear and to see the actual context. Let me give you an example. He comes in, he's been gone for half a day. Jacob, what you're cooking smells great. Oh man, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. I'm dying here. Can you give me some of what you got? He's being dramatic, right? He's not really dying, but he's hungry. And he wants something. So in that context, he doesn't value the treasure of his birthright. He takes it for granted. He takes for granted that God has blessed and passed on from Abraham to Isaac. Kid, You're going to have more descendants than the stars in the sky. All this land will be yours by birthright. And as parts of the New Testament say, Hebrews 12, Esau was a fool because he gave up his birthright for just a morsel of food. He was profane because he basically trampled on the gifts of God. Right? He's an idiot to give this up. It reminds me of Dumb and Dumber, where Lloyd sells Harry's dead bird to a small child who has a disability. He can't see. He's pretty bird, for a truck. And it's just this disparate. It's a terrible deal. You know, it's like an older brother or siblings, and the younger kid's got an ice cream, and the older brother or sister says, I'll trade you this toy for your ice cream. And the younger child gets it and says, this toy's broken. Too bad, no trade backs. Sorry. You know, he's pulling one over on him. Or is Esau collapsing at the door? Is he literally, as he says in the text, I am near death. What good is my birthright if I'm not around to see it? Jacob, you're my hope here. If you don't give me something to eat, I may not make it. Now, the text doesn't describe him like the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the man's left for half dead and the guy has to put him on his donkey and carry him. It doesn't describe him as collapsed or anything like that. But oh, what a difference it would make if we knew. Because on the one hand, if he's critical, if he's really at death's door, then Jacob looks even worse than the conniving, manipulative jerk he comes off as by just saying, yeah, I'll give you this. You want some stew? I'll give you some stew, but it's going to cost you. You know, give me your Huh? You got to give me something first. Give me your birthright. Deal. Or is he, in his hour of need, not going to take care of his twin brother? I'll let you die. Has he planned it? Yeah, go off to that direction, because I've scared all the game. Go off and hunt that way. And everybody else, Dad and Mom, yeah, go ahead and, go for a walk, because I'm going to be cooking here. How much has he planned this out? How much has he, in other words, how badly do we sometimes want to win? Have to have something that doesn't belong to us, and we'll do whatever we have to do to get ahead, no matter who it hurts, no matter what we do to the people we love, but we're going to get ours. Because that's a whole lot what it looks like that Jacob's doing. Not that any of our families, when somebody's on death's door and dying, that some cousin or a strange brother or sister who hasn't been around or talked to that dying person for a decade comes in, and right after they're dead, has anybody opened the will? Am I in there? No, we don't know what this is like. This kind of trampling on anybody to get ours. Doesn't one sometimes feel bad for Esau? I mean, as I look through this story, I think, is he foolish? Or, as the commentators and often the rabbis say as they tell this story, he didn't recognize this amazing gift God had given him, so he blows it. He gives it away because he doesn't value it. At least that's how the story is told. It's told that way in the New Testament. It's told that way often in our Sunday school classes. It's told that way often in our Bible studies and in our sermons. In fact, it's told that way in history. If you look at how the Apostle Paul views it, in Romans, he says, after all, God said, Jacob I loved, favored son, Esau I hated. Is God unjust? No, of course not. God can show mercy on who God wants to. And he chose Jacob. I've always struggled with that. What do you mean God loathes or hates Esau? God blesses him too. God makes a nation out of him. God tells the Israelites in Deuteronomy, you will not harm your brothers, the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, because they are your kin. Don't treat them badly. No, it's, as Paul sees it, one people is favored and the other not so much. And this plays on through history. Cotton Mather, a Puritan pastor, Congregationalists like you and I, when they came to the Wampanoag villages, the same people, by the way, who at Thanksgiving we celebrate as, sharing the first Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims, when Cotton Mather came to the Wampanoag village, which had been decimated by diseases brought by the Pilgrims, he said, I quote, "God's providence has given us this land, these huts, these fields, and taken it from these savages so that we might inherit it. Blessed children, not so much." How we tell our stories. This text is disturbing and I think challenging because it can also be used to prop up a favoredness, one over the other. And through our histories, sometimes we've told it that way. John Milton used to describe, again, Puritans as the Jacob, the favored ones, while he described the Presbyterians who were in competition with the settlements of the New England area as the Edomites, the lesser brothers, because he felt them to be uppity and a little bit too tightly wound. Jewish rabbis described the Edomites as the Gentiles who were not supposed to be mixing with the pure-blood Jewish synagogues in the first and second centuries. Now, Edom was always the less favored one. We continue, and you think about what's going on in this text, brother against brother, and there's history of it throughout the Testaments. And I think the history is important in the telling because there's a history between these brothers that carries on generationally, like a Hatfield and McCoy feud. Later, as we read through the Bible, the Hebrew people are coming out of Exodus, out of Egypt. They've been enslaved. Moses goes to the king of Edom and says, "Kadesh," the king's name, "please, we've been enslaved. We've been in chains by Pharaoh. We're wandering to the land," and Edom's to the south, Moab's to the east, and then Ammon. These are the nations that surround Israel. So we're coming up from the south out of Egypt. "Please let us pass through the king's road to go to the land God has promised us. We promise we won't drink from your wells or take any of your food." And the king of Edom says, "Heck no. Remember when you took our land for a bowl of stew? Remember how you call us Edomites for red stuff?" Yeah, I know kinder historians talk about red stuff being the red sandstone that's in the land of Edom, in that geographic area. It's kind of like Arizona. It's this beautiful red sandstone. If you've ever seen the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when they go with the knights into that rock-hewn temple, Petra, that was the capital of Edom. And so a lot of kind historians say this is what it looks like, but most of the Edomites realized it was for that red stuff stew. You're calling us stew boy, basically, because of this bad deal you gave us. So you want to come through our land now? Take the 100-mile detour and go that way, because if you come through our land, I'll meet you with my army, and I'll kill every last one of you. And Moses says he doesn't really mean that. And they start to go through Edom because it's a lot shorter. And sure enough, the king of Edom comes out and meets them with his army and says, "Get out." Later, Israel returns the favor. King David, King Solomon, they conquer Edom. They say, "Yeah, you're our kinfolk. We know it says we're not supposed to treat you badly, but you're going to pay us tribute every year, 10, 20, 30% of what you get in your fields, your livestock, they're coming to us." So decades of oppression. And then finally, if you read like the book of Malachi, or especially the book of Obadiah in the Bible, when Babylon comes through the land, and the king of Babylonia says, "We're going to destroy Israel for their defiance," and they lay siege to Jerusalem. The prophet Obadiah, that entire book is about God's judgment against Edom. Edom, how could you stand there when notice the language, your brother Jacob, all the way back to this story. When your brother Jacob was in his hour of need. The Babylonians were killing our men, women, and children. They were taking us out in exile. They were razing the temple and watching it burn. And you came and stood in the city and laughed. And while we were in our distress, you came and you looted everything that we have. And you watched it burn. And then when our survivors tried to flee on the roadways and through the woods, you stood at the crossways. You caught us and turned us back to the Babylonians who were killing us. And you turned us in. How could you do such a thing to your brother Jacob? Well, if you recall, Jacob took our birthright and our blessing. Jacob was none too kind to us. And how we tell that story. Today, we are also in battles of how we tell our history, how we tell our stories. Most epically or probably noticeably in the news around monuments. In the South, Confederacy. And there are many Southerners and others who say, this is history, you can't tear this down. And we argue about whether these statues are coming down or not. When were they built? What kind of history are they telling? Were they Reconstructionists? Were they in response to the Civil Rights Movement? Some people don't care. They got to stay up or they got to come down. Instead of considering how we are telling our story and who's left out. How have we whitewashed it? So that we don't have to deal with the struggle and the pain of the history and who is included and who is left out. If you could see these stained glass windows, it tells a history of a body of Christ here in this church who, when the culture around them and the churches around them, people of faith around them said, people of color are not equal. They're not people. They're just a little bit above animals. And we said, no, they are free brothers and sisters and engaged in the Underground Railroad movement. And whether it's Honduran missions, work with the Hawaiians, or the Civil Rights movement, these tell a story, but that story, I hope, is not done being told. So whether this text speaks to us individually or as a people, it also magnifies where are our biases and our prejudices. Because in the pain of this story, we have one brother who, after Jacob and his mother, by the way, I'm not going to steal future sermon thunder here, but he and Rebekah duped their father in his blindness into giving the primary blessing to Jacob too. He steals it outright from Esau as he's going out to prepare his own meal for his father. And out of deference to his father, Esau says, while our old man is still alive, I'm not going to touch a hair on your head. But as soon as Isaac dies, God bless his heart, I'm going to hunt you down, Jacob, like the dog you've been to me. And so help me God if I don't kill you. I don't care if you're my twin. You're no brother of mine. And so Jacob hears this from Rebekah, his mother. His father Isaac knows it, sends him on his way, and he goes to Haran. He runs. One brother runs, one brother fights. And for 20 years, these guys don't talk. For 20 years is all this guilt, all this regret. When Jacob meets God at the ladder, Pastor Michelle will talk about it next week. One of his prayers is, God, you will be my God if, when I go home, you'll grant me peace in my father's house. I've made a mess of things. My brother and I did not leave on good footing. Help me somehow, some way. He hasn't owned it yet. He hasn't owned his peace, and I don't think, but he's starting to as he's running and he's desperate. Maybe starting to realize how his actions also affected his brother's reactions. Take me home in peace. Is Esau a bad guy? Sometimes he's talked about that way. Heck, Hebrews says he's profane. But he's also blessed. He's blessed of God. He's included in God's story. He's also a nation. And in the end, the story ends in a beautiful way. The movie, A River Runs Through It, ends with the eldest brother, his father and brother now dead, and he says, of course, now I'm much too old to be much of a fisherman, and now I usually fish the big waters alone, although some of my friends think I shouldn't. But when I'm alone in the half-light of the canyon, all the existence seems to fade into a being with my soul and my memories. And the sounds of Big Blackfoot River, the 4-count rhythm, and a hope that a fish will rise. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood, and it runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops, and under the rocks are words. Some of the words are theirs, and the waters haunt me. Pain, regret, coulda, woulda, shoulda. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones we have hardest time understanding. I don't know where this text meets you today. It's a son or a daughter, somebody in your family who struggle with addiction, somebody who refuses to speak to you, somebody you're refusing to speak to, or the struggle and the way we talk about those people. These folks are members of the church. These folks aren't. And we draw this chosen versus cursed otherness. I want you to leave you with this. Neither of those brothers on that fateful day when one brother wanted to kill the other thought that their relationship would ever be healed or that they would ever find a way that their paths would be on the same again. They had distanced and given themselves up on one another. No brother of mine. But much like the prodigal son story, in a field, as one brother, the younger, wrestles with whether he could come home or how his brother's going to receive him, and when he runs and sees his brother, he says to Esau, who he's cheated out of house and home, "Brother, seeing you is like seeing the face of God." I'm sorry. This text is about reconciliation. And in our differences and our wounds, the way we hurt each other, finding peace and seeing God in the one that we said wasn't good enough before. I pray, like Jacob, who likes to wrestle, that we would wrestle with this text between the verses where it gets real. And may the hope, God bring me peace with my father's house and my brother, be yours and you're in my prayer today for a nation, for a people, for our families. Amen.